1500 and going above and beyond that. And therefore, I'd like to share them with you today so that hopefully you can get that breakthrough in chess quickly. Now, let's have a look at white attempting the Scholar's Mate, which is surprisingly much more popular than we'd naturally assume, but that's not even the main point. The main point is to see the difference between beginner players, intermediate players, and advanced players, right? And I'm gonna really break it down so that it makes it super easy. Now, initially, white wants to deliver the Scholar's Mate, so we cover, and after Queen f3, let's say we go Queen f6. One of the interesting ways for black to counter, probably the easiest way to counter the checkmating pattern of white and to get a good position. Now, here comes the first question. For example, white goes something neutral, something like knight to c3, and now we're faced with this evergreen question, to take or not to take? That's the question. Now, what do you think about this? You may also go together with me so that you can see immediately how to get that improvement. And by the way, now you don't have to be a natural born super talented chess kid who was raised by listening to Nakamura streams instead of lullabies. No, there are just a few simple improvements that you can make and you get that breakthrough in chess. Now, one of them is about this position. Now, most players in such situations, they capture, they take. And to the real OGs, you know that to take is a mistake, but I'm gonna break it down anyway. Now, here's the problem. Weak players, they do take here, just because it feels like the easiest solution. Now, what's the downside of that move? What's the problem? Well, you help your opponent to develop their knight, and you do that with your own move. So if you look at this position, let's just count. White has 3 minor pieces in the game, black has 1, which means that white is more active and white is more likely to begin attacking down the road. Now, let's compare that to a better option. Now, an intermediate player may just play some development move. And the strongest players know that you need to not only maintain the pressure, meaning not to take, but also to increase the pressure, because you want to push your opponent to take. And how do you do that? Well, you can play knight to d4. From here, you attack the queen and this pawn. Now you force white to do that mistake, to release the pressure. Now they take, helping you to develop your knight. Now let's count pieces right here. So he's got 2 minor pieces in the game, we've got 2 minor pieces in the game. Pretty cool. On top of that, we're attacking this pawn, threatening fork, which means that right now white also needs to play some defensive move, which again loses time. Now that clearly is far better compared to the previous situation we analyzed, right? Okay, now let's move on to the next thing. Let's take it one move back right after black played queen to f6. In most cases, white does voluntarily play that mistake themselves. They trade on f6, and now let's say they play d3. So what should black play in the current position? Once again, let's analyze the difference between different levels of players. Now, black can play any normal developing move, such as bring the bishop somewhere, play pawn d6 to open up the other bishop from c8, and that would be okay. That is what beginner to intermediate level players would do. Now, what would be the move played by the strongest players? That would be an attacking move, because attack is the best. That's how you win games, right? That's how you basically put pressure, how you break your opponent's confidence and win games, is by attacking. And knight a4 is clearly the best, threatening this fork to the king and rook, and also forcing white to play some defensive move. Now, for example, white goes bishop b3. Now, once again, same question. How do you play here if you're black? And again, we've got a choice. Now, first off, beginners will probably notice that there is an opportunity to trade off a knight for a bishop. And beginners typically think that these pieces have equal value, because they both are valued at approximately 3 pawns. That's what chess books and tutorials teach us. Now, it's not exactly correct, and intermediate to advanced level players know that bishop is in fact a little bit stronger than a knight. And generally speaking, this trade is favorable for black. So that's nice if you can do that. And if you think to take right here and you realize that it gives you some advantage, that's great. It means that you're in that intermediate to advanced level bucket of players. If instead black played any other move, not too bad either. However, the strongest players know all the same stuff, that they wish to attack. Now, taking on b3 is no bad. Again, you grab a bishop, that's nice. However, after that, that's just an exchange. Nothing happens after that, right? We just keep playing normal chess. White has no problems. So strong players ask themselves, can I attack my opponent? Can I go forward and create threats? That's the question that strong players ask themselves all the time. And asking yourself that question, you can come up with the move pawn a5. That's a move forward that creates a threat. Now you're threatening to go a4, chase away this bishop, and if we successfully do this, we can then renew our threat of knight takes c2, forking the king and rook. Now, of course, white can move his own pawn forward, but then if you trade, you force him to split up his pawns, making them weak. Also, some squares are weak in front of those pawns, and that definitely is great for you. So that's not such a simple solution for white. In most cases, white goes pawn c3. Now, once again, let's analyze how different players would handle this situation. The worst decision would be to move the knight back anywhere. Now, of course, I'm not talking about blundering the knight. That would be certainly the worst. But anyway, moving it back anywhere is a bad decision. Why? Generally, you do not want to move your pieces back unless it is completely forced, because in chess, you want to go forward and attack. Now, also, that wastes time, meaning after you move the knight back, now it is white to play, and white can play any move he wants to. For example, he can go bishop g5, attack your knight, and now you have to worry about that thing. Now, therefore, instead, taking with the knight on b3 is a much better idea. Now, you don't waste time for retreat, plus you still get that advantage of having an exchange of your knight against his bishop. That's nice. So knight b3 is a nice option. Now, what's the strongest option to play? That's interesting. That's an idea of a counterplay, missed by pretty much all beginner and intermediate level players. Counterattack is something that we typically don't even think about, because the natural pattern is when we are attacked, we think how to defend or how to retreat, right? So counterattack is the kind of upper level skill, but nevertheless, it's very good to have it. And here, black can counterattack by going a4. He attacks your knight, you attack his bishop, and again, we keep putting more pressure. Now, if white takes, we take the bishop. Now, we also have some new threats. We are threatening this pawn or this pawn on a2. Now, if white captures on e5, you can try to follow the same thinking process yourself now. And as you may have guessed, the worst idea would be to move the knight. That's what weak players would do. They would notice the threat and move the knight away. Stronger players will think about counterattacking moves, which are either pawn takes here, attacking the knight, or rook takes here. And if you consider these two moves, that's pretty cool. Now, how do you pick the strongest one? Well, in such positions, you gotta calculate. And the nice thing about chess is that you don't really have to calculate all the time. That's actually a misconception that grandmasters just calculate and visualize for 20 moves ahead in every position. Not at all. Like, we GMs are lazy guys, We do not like to do all that. We want to simplify our life, and we only calculate when it's necessary. So the question is, when is it necessary to calculate? Well, it is when there is this kind of tactical pressure, when pieces and pawns start attacking each other. And there is an opportunity to win the game, hopefully, if you can just grab something and end up with an extra material, right? So that's the position when there is this tension, pieces attacking each other or pawns attacking each other, that's when you need to calculate. And calculation in this case is pretty simple, because you realize that, well, you probably have just these two moves. I mean, maybe bishop b4 check as well, but it looks maybe less promising, and you gotta just compare them. So if, let's say, we take it with a pawn. Now, he takes our knight, we queen, he probably recaptures. Now, end of story, and there is nothing too special here, right? That was just an exchange. Now, let's take it back. How about we take it here with a rook? Now, we threaten to capture his rook as well as to attack his remaining pieces along the first rank, and if he captures, now there's this unusual situation where it was supposed to be the white pawn on a2, right? But your pawn clearly hit the home run, and now he can't stop the promotion on the next move, so you just win the game. Nice, right? You can see how easily you can overpower your opponents, and outsmart them just by doing this simple little tweaks to your usual thinking system. Now, let's also check the most played variation here. In most cases, white takes here on f6, which, as we already know, is drawn, helps black to develop. After that, the most common move by white is knight f3. Now, what's wrong with this move? What do you think? Now, that develops a knight, which is nice. White is getting ready to castle, also nice. Maybe white wants to play knight g5 and attack this pawn. That's still cool. But what's the problem? Well, the problem is white forgot the main thing that a lot of beginners forget, that it takes two to tango, and we gotta be mindful of our opponent. It's all good, but black just now grabs this pawn on e4. It also shuts down knight g5 thing, but for the most part, it's just a blunder. And it was the most played move by white to play knight f3. So you can see how common that is, just to forget that your opponent also thinks about something, and we gotta be aware of this. Now, also, after, let's say, white goes d3, the knight goes back somewhere, and white tries this sort of fried liver attack. What would you play here? Think about this. It's also a great position that clearly illustrates differences of the way of thinking between different categories of players. Now, the worst move for black would be probably just to blunder a pawn, all right? And from there, also, white can attack the rook or the king. The second worst would be going knight to d8, which does defend this pawn, but in a very passive fashion. And generally, you do not want to bring your pieces back unless it is absolutely necessary, because now the knight is not doing anything besides guarding this pawn. Therefore, knight d8 is the move you do not want to play. Now, if you thought about playing knight e6 and just covering these squares that way, that is perfectly fine. I'm fine with that, and playing a move like that is enough to reach that 1500 rating. However, if you want to go beyond that and aim for 2000 and above that, then you gotta also think about counter-attacking moves that create counter threats. And there are a number of them. Like one is knight d4, pretty cool, countering their pawn and also threatening fork. That's one interesting option. Also, you can think about f6 or h6, which counters the knight. And in this case, for example, h6 actually turns out to be pretty interesting because we attack this knight, and after he captures the pawn, it looks like white succeeded. However, after rook h7, it turns out that the knight has no way back. Think about this. This square is controlled by our pawn. This pawn is guarded. Our pawn is guarding this square. Therefore, the knight has no way out. And on the next move after white plays whatever, you can either just take it with the rook, and that's already cool because having two minor pieces for the rook is a material advantage and black gets a winning position, or you can even think of eliminating this bishop somehow. Let's say knight e6, perhaps the easiest, just to close this diagonal, and on the next move there is nothing white can do to stop you from capturing this knight, and black wins a piece. Here's a puzzle of the day, and your task is to find the best move for black and to write it down in comments below.